I buried half a woman. That's the truth nobody wants to hear at a funeral, but it's the truth all the same. For 56 years, I thought I was married to all of Dorothy. Turns out I only got her Mondays, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The rest belonged to someone else. The funeral parlour smelled like cheap flowers and industrial carpet cleaner. That thick, cloying smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you home. I was sitting in the front pew where they put the grieving widowers when this woman approached Dorothy's casket. She was maybe 50 years old, with Dorothy's stubborn jawline and Dorothy's way of pressing her lips together when she was trying not to cry. She placed a single yellow rose among all the white ones. Yellow was Dorothy's favourite colour, something I thought only I knew. This stranger knew it too. "Thank you for coming," I said when she turned to leave. "It's what you say at funerals. It's what widowers are supposed to say to people who loved their wives." "She was special to you, wasn't she?" The woman stopped walking, looked at me with eyes that were definitely Dorothy's eyes, just 30 years younger. "She was my mother," she said quietly. My hearing isn't what it used to be, but I heard that perfectly, every word. "That's not possible," I said. "Dorothy and I never had children. We couldn't. There were complications." The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Old, creased from being carried around. It showed Dorothy, maybe 40 years old, holding a baby, standing next to a man I'd never seen, tall, dark-haired, completely different from me. Dorothy was smiling in the photo, really smiling, the kind of smile I hadn't seen on her face in decades. "My name is Patricia," the woman said. "Patricia Donovan. This is my father, Michael Donovan. They were married from 1967 to 1995. 1967 to 1995, 28 years. We got married in 1967. Dorothy had been married to both of us for 28 years. Somehow." "Where?" I asked. It was all my throat could manage. "Buffalo, about 3 hours north. She lived there Fridays through Sundays, had a house on Elm Street, worked at the library." Fridays through Sundays. Dorothy's weekend visits to her sick sister. For 28 years, every Friday morning, Dorothy would pack her small suitcase and drive 3 hours to take care of her sister Louise, who had chronic fatigue and couldn't manage on her own. Except there was no Sister Louise. There never had been a Sister Louise. There was a husband named Michael and a daughter named Patricia, and a life Dorothy lived while I sat home alone, missing her, counting the hours until Sunday night when she'd return. Patricia showed me more photographs. Dorothy at Christmas morning in a house I'd never seen. Dorothy at a high school graduation, beaming with pride. Dorothy holding grandchildren I didn't know existed. 28 years of photographs showing a woman who looked like my wife but seemed happier somehow, more relaxed, more alive. How many? I asked. How many children? Just me, but I have 3 kids of my own, Dorothy's grandchildren. She was a wonderful grandmother. Grandmother. Dorothy was a grandmother. While I was mourning the fact that we'd never had children, Dorothy was babysitting grandchildren 3 hours away. While I was wondering why she seemed tired on Monday mornings, she was returning from weekend family gatherings where she played with children who called her Grandma. Did your father know about me? I asked. Patricia nodded. They both knew about each other. It was an arrangement. Dad said she couldn't choose, so they found a way to make it work. An arrangement. 56 years of marriage, and I was learning at Dorothy's funeral that our entire relationship had been one half of an arrangement. Every Friday, when she kissed me goodbye and promised to call if her sister needed her to stay longer. Every Sunday, when she'd return with stories about Louise's medical appointments and medication changes and small improvements. All of it was lies. All of it was cover story for the life she was really living with her real family. She talked about you, Patricia said gently, said you were a good man, said you deserved better than half a wife, but she couldn't bring herself to hurt you by leaving. Half a wife. That's exactly what I'd gotten. Half a wife who gave me her weekdays and gave someone else her weekends. Half a wife who shared my bed Sunday through Thursday and shared his bed Friday and Saturday. Half a wife who loved me enough to stay, but not enough to be completely mine. The funeral director was starting to look nervous. Other mourners were arriving, and here I was having a breakdown conversation with a stranger who claimed to be my wife's daughter. But I couldn't stop asking questions, couldn't stop picking at the wound that had just opened up in my chest. The house, I said. How did she afford 2 houses? She worked at the library in Buffalo, part-time, but enough to pay her share of the mortgage. And Dad was a plumber, good money. Dorothy worked at a library. For 28 years, my wife had a job I knew nothing about. While I was going to work at the insurance office, thinking I was the sole provider for our household, Dorothy was driving 3 hours north to clock in at a job she'd never mentioned. She had co-workers I'd never met. She had work friends who probably wondered why she only worked weekends. She had a whole professional life that existed completely separate from me. Did she ever think about telling me? I asked. Patricia looked uncomfortable, especially toward the end when she got sick. The cancer made her think about unfinished business, but she was terrified of destroying everything. Said you'd built your life around her, and she couldn't bear to take that away. Cancer. Pancreatic cancer that took Dorothy in 6 months. I was with her for every treatment, every test result, every sleepless night when the pain got bad. I held her hand while she died, told her I loved her, promised to keep her memory alive forever. And 3 hours north, Patricia and Michael were doing the exact same thing. We were both losing Dorothy, both grieving the same woman, both trying to comfort her through her final months. Dorothy had somehow managed to die surrounded by love from 2 families who didn't know about each other. Patricia gave me her phone number that day, said there were things Dorothy had wanted both families to have, documents and photographs and explanations that might help us understand why she'd chosen to live the way she did. I didn't call for 3 weeks, couldn't bring myself to learn more about how thoroughly I'd been deceived. But eventually, curiosity won. I needed to know how much of my marriage had been real and how much had been performance. Patricia drove down from Buffalo the next weekend, brought boxes of Dorothy's things from the house on Elm Street, the house I'd never seen, the house where Dorothy had been wife and mother and grandmother for 28 years while being my childless, weekendless wife. She showed me Dorothy's other wedding album, different dress, different flowers, same radiant smile. She showed me report cards and school photos and piano recital programs, evidence of the motherhood Dorothy had hidden from me for nearly 3 decades. She showed me Christmas cards Dorothy had sent from Buffalo that were actually from Buffalo, birthday cards to grandchildren I'd never heard of, thank you notes for babysitting weekends and holiday visits. Most devastating of all, she showed me a letter Dorothy had written but never sent. It was addressed to me, dated just 2 months before she died. In it, Dorothy tried to explain. She said she'd fallen in love with 2 good men who each deserved a full wife. She said she'd found a way to give both of us the best parts of herself, even if it meant neither of us got all of her. She wrote that Michael was her weeknight husband, her family man, her anchor to domestic happiness. I was her weekday husband, her intellectual companion, her partner in the quieter kind of love that happens when you grow old together. She said she needed both relationships to feel complete. Choosing one would have left her broken. Leaving either one would have destroyed a good man who'd done nothing wrong except love her. Most people walk away when stories get this heavy. The fact that you're still listening, that means something. Dorothy's letter explained the logistics, how she'd maintained 2 phone numbers, 2 sets of friends, 2 completely separate social circles, how she'd convinced Michael that her Monday-Thursday absences were caring for her elderly father who lived alone and needed help, how she'd convinced me that her Friday-Sunday absences were caring for her chronically ill sister who couldn't be left alone. Both stories were believable because Dorothy was the kind of person who would absolutely sacrifice her weekends to care for family. We'd both fallen in love with her sense of duty and compassion. We just didn't realize she was using those same qualities to deceive us. The letter also revealed something I'd wondered about for years. Why Dorothy never wanted to take long vacations. Why she always insisted on keeping trips short, staying close to home. Why she seemed anxious if I suggested spontaneous weekend getaways or extended holiday visits with my family. She couldn't disappear from either life for too long without raising suspicions. Her schedule was so carefully constructed that even a few days off would have exposed everything. I started noticing things I'd missed for 56 years. How Dorothy never wore perfume on Fridays, but always returned on Sunday smelling like unfamiliar soap. How she received phone calls she'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. How she always knew exactly what she wanted from the grocery store, never browsing or changing her mind. She was shopping for 2 households, following 2 different meal plans, maintaining 2 different pantries. How she never gained weight despite eating regularly at both homes. She was literally living 2 lives, burning energy, maintaining 2 relationships, 2 homes, 2 sets of responsibilities. Patricia and I started meeting regularly. It felt strange at first, bonding over loving the same woman who'd lied to both of us. But gradually, we developed our own relationship. She'd tell me stories about Dorothy's mothering that I'd never witnessed. I'd share memories of Dorothy's companionship that Patricia had never experienced. Between us, we had a more complete picture of who Dorothy really was. She wasn't 2 different people. She was one person who was big enough to love 2 families completely. She was someone who refused to choose between 2 good options. So she found a way to embrace both. Was it fair to Michael or to me? No. Was it sustainable? Clearly not, since the secret came out at her funeral. But was it motivated by love rather than selfishness? I think so. Patricia showed me the Buffalo house before it was sold. Smaller than ours, but warmer somehow, more lived in. Photos of family gatherings I'd never attended. A garden Dorothy had planted and maintained for years. A sewing room where she'd made Halloween costumes and Christmas stockings and graduation dresses. Evidence of the maternal life she'd lived, while convincing me we were content being childless. Michael had died 5 years before Dorothy. Heart attack at age 78. I remembered that time. Dorothy went through what she called a difficult period, said she was feeling mortal, worried about getting older, afraid of losing the people she loved. I encouraged her to see a grief counsellor, thinking she was processing the normal anxieties of aging. She wasn't processing anxiety, she was mourning her weekend husband, the man whose funeral I never knew happened, the man whose death left her weekend family without their father figure, while I remained oblivious to their loss. Dorothy's final months were complicated in ways I'm still trying to understand. She was dying in two different contexts. At our house, she was the beloved wife, leaving behind her devoted husband of 56 years. At Patricia's house, she was the cherished mother and grandmother, leaving behind children and grandchildren who'd loved her their entire lives. She managed to be completely present for both experiences, made sure both families felt prioritized during her final weeks. Both families felt like we were Dorothy's primary concern as she prepared to die. There are more stories I need to get off my chest. If you want to hear them, hit subscribe. I'll be here. I'm 81 years old. I spent the last 6 months trying to decide whether I'm angry or impressed. Dorothy managed to love two families completely for 28 years. She gave me 56 years of weekday marriage that felt full and satisfying and real. She gave Michael 28 years of weekend marriage that apparently felt equally complete. She gave Patricia a mother who never missed important events, who was always available for advice and support, who loved her grandchildren with the kind of devotion I thought Dorothy couldn't feel because we'd never had children. The math doesn't add up, but somehow the love did. We were all Dorothy's priority. We all felt like we were the center of her world. We all got versions of her that were genuine and devoted and authentic. The fact that there were multiple versions doesn't make any version less real. It just makes Dorothy more complicated than any of us imagined. I don't forgive her yet. Maybe I never will. But I understand her better now. Some people love in ways that don't fit conventional expectations. Some people are big enough to maintain multiple relationships without shortchanging any of them. Some people create impossible situations because the alternative, hurting people they love, seems worse than living a lie. Dorothy had another family for 28 years. I found out the day of her funeral. It wasn't the ending I expected for our marriage, but maybe it's the beginning of understanding that love doesn't always look the way we think it should. Maybe Dorothy wasn't living two lives. Maybe she was living one life that was big enough to include loving two families completely. Maybe the rest of us are just too small to comprehend that kind of love. I buried half a woman, but maybe half of Dorothy was more love than most people get from a whole person. Maybe I was lucky to get my half, even if I never knew about the other half. Maybe being part of Dorothy's impossible life was better than having all of someone else's ordinary one.